Why is it ridiculous to think that the United States, NATO, the West, can resupply and rearm the Ukrainian armed forces? Why is it that Zelensky's call to build a 1 million man Ukraine army is so absurd? Because it is. It's absurd to anyone who pays attention to the military situation on the ground in Ukraine, in the special military operation. And the reason that any such call for a million-man army is absurd, and why the notion of the West effectively resupplying the Ukraine armed forces can be summed up in two words: Yavoriv and, how do you pronounce the other one? Desna. Sorry about that, man. I don't speak Russian or Ukraine, you know? But yes, Desna and Yavoriv are the reason. Now, Desna and Yavoriv are locations. They are training and supply centers in Ukraine. Yavoriv is just west of Lviv, in the west of Ukraine, and Desna is just to the northeast of Kiev, near the town of Chernihiv, which is a big military center. Now, in these two towns, in these two locations, the Russians have struck with their missiles and struck them at will. And they hit Yavoriv, well, several times at this point. The first time was in very early March, if I recall correctly. I do want to say like the 2nd or 3rd of March. They hit it, and they killed like 600 foreign mercenaries. Just like that. Just one shot, and that was it. And they blew up. Estimates at the time were something like $400 million worth of gear. $400 million worth of gear. That's how much they blew up in the one attack. And I do believe that so far there have been 4 there. And insofar as Desna, well, it turns out that a couple of days ago, something that was not reported in the West, well, it was struck by a Russian attack, missile attack. And they hit it, and they killed a whole bunch of soldiers. That area was being used to train soldiers and equip them, of course. And they got hit. They got hit hard. And it's just a message. And the message is really simple. The message is any kind of weapons that you try to bring into Ukraine, we can hit them anywhere. And if you really try to build a 1 million man army, we're going to hit it relentlessly. Western commentators, morons that they are, no, not Western commentators, morons that they are, no. Western commentators who buy into the narrative, Western commentators who believe the bullshit. Either they believe it because they actually believe it, or they believe it because it's in their financial best interest to believe it. Well, these people keep insisting that the West, the United States, that NATO can keep on resupplying Ukraine endlessly. That's not true. It's not true at all, because see, you can maybe buy and manufacture the weapons and send them. But there's a great difference between sending the weapons and actually getting them and putting them on the front and using them against the opponent. If the opponent is denying you the ability to do that with these imported weapons, then the weapons are, for all intents and purposes, useless. The weapons are actually a death trap, because if you're handling these weapons, you're going to get hit by a missile. And some of these commentators, I mean, fools, I mean, it's unbelievable. They say that the reason that the Russians haven't hit more locations, targeted more locations with more missile strikes more relentlessly, is because the Russians are running out of missiles. That's just projection. That's the worst part. See? Because the Americans, they actually are running out of javelins and Stinger missiles. They are. And the Brits also, they're running out of their MLAWs or whatever they're called. They actually are running out of those missiles, but the Russians aren't. The Western commentators can't get it through their skull that the Russians are going soft on the Ukrainian armed forces. They're hitting them really hard where they're fighting in the Donbass. But they're trying to go soft and not completely annihilate them in their barracks, which they could do if they wanted to. They're trying not to do that because they understand that once this conflict is over, you are going to need an army to maintain order. And you need an army, an armed force in every country to maintain order. In your peaceful country, it's called the police. when you have had a war, a big destructive campaign, like what's going on now, you're going to need the army to make sure that there's order. I've lived in Chile, I'm from Chile, and when there have been earthquakes, the bad ones, the 7.5 and up, which I've been through 2 of those, well, the army gets deployed immediately because you need the army to maintain order. The civil police force is not going to be enough. And so the Russians understand this, and so the Russians are not hitting the Ukrainian armed forces as hard as they could. I keep trying to emphasize this, and so many people don't seem to understand this. The Russians don't have this enormous animosity towards Ukraine. They are not trying to destroy Ukraine. That's why they keep insisting that it's a special military operation. And in casual conversation, or when I'm talking about things, just to make it easy, I don't call it a special military operation. I just call it a war, or a conflict, or invasion, or whatever. But that nomenclature is actually important because it signals that for the Russians, this is not a war. Because if it were a war, they would be relentless. They'd annihilate Ukrainian armed forces. Just as if there is a war with NATO, the Russians will annihilate. And they're not going to send a few missiles every once in a while just to, keep things tidy and send the message. No, they're going to be relentless if they fight with NATO. And I think that NATO understands this, although these Western commentators don't. And my fear is that these Western commentators kind of like wind up everybody's emotions and gives them a false sense of reality and a false understanding of the situation. The best metaphor that I can come up with, and that I posted in a video a few days ago, and that I'll repeat here. The metaphor here is you have a kid brother, and you get into a fight with him, and you're kicking the shit out of him, but you're not really kicking the shit out of him. I mean, right? I mean, you might be giving him a bloody nose and beating him up, but you're not really trying to hurt him. You're not trying to destroy him, like you would, for instance, some guy who gives you some words outside of a club or something. You see my point? It's very important to understand this, and it's important so that you understand why things are going the way that they are going. Western commentators are not giving that because Western commentators, they just want a bigger war because they want the excitement, I suppose. But now you know better.